I talked to one college football coach yesterday who said, watch for lawsuits if we try to have players on the field when fans aren't even allowed in stadiums. Not to mention the fact that you've got campuses right now, universities that are closed. So if you're going to say, hey, it's not safe for any of the students on campus to be here, but we're going to try to welcome the players back, that's just going to be very complicated. So as we put out, there are so many timelines here that are important. The end of May, early June is when all of these conferences, the NCAA is going to come together, put their heads together, and reassess all of this. They're looking at if they can ideally try and start on time, it would be July 15th-ish where you would try to have players come back to campus. And I think where we have to look at that right now is that a lot of these universities, Greeny, are already closed for the summer. So that timeline may be becoming less and less likely. And what I'm hearing is that a lot of conference commissioners are still planning for football in the fall. That's still their ideal scenario, but there's so much here to where they have to put the player safety paramount. They have to avoid what's going to happen potentially from a lawsuit standpoint, and they have to make sure that they're doing what's right by their players.
All right, Laura, I've got a couple of familiar faces to you for sure that were with us this morning as well. Paul Finebaum and Booger McFarland are here. It is great to see both of you guys. Paul, I want to start with you on this. What is your thought on the notion of college football games on the field with no fans in the stands?
I think it would be the end of college football as we know it, Greeny. And I don't think it will happen, but if it does, it would further shatter this myth of intercollegiate athletics being amateur. That would be a pure professional sellout. And from what I hear, I do not believe college presidents and commissioners would go for this. I know I talked to Jimbo Fisher the other day, and he said we have to have football, although he said all the right things in the aftermath of that. But I think it would cheapen the sport. It would just simply devalue everything that college presidents stand up for at orientation and at graduation. And I don't think it would ever recover from that.
What do you think of that, Booger?
Well, Greeny, here's the thing that I would say is how are you going to convince me as a player that it's safe for me to go out there and have hand-to-hand physical combat for 3 hours when it's not safe for the fans to be in the stands who arbitrarily are just sitting there doing nothing? So I understand we all are clamoring for sports. We all want to play football. That's how I made my living. That's how I make my living now. But at some point, common sense has to prevail. And if it's not safe for the fans to sit in the stands 6 inches apart, how in the hell is it safe for me to go out there and bleed and sweat and cry with the guy that I'm going to be going against? I just don't understand that. And I get it. I understand where we are. But can someone please explain that to me?
Yeah, there's a huge differentiation, I think, for a variety of obvious reasons that you guys are pointing out between the pros coming back and the colleges. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, well, let me point out a few more things here, guys. Over $4 billion is at stake here in the fiscal year that we will be talking about for these universities. And that's just with the top 50 public institutions in Power 5 programs, Power 5 conferences. So when we're looking at how much money is at stake here, that's another big piece of this. And people say, well, wait a second, the players aren't being paid. How is that even a fair way to look at it? I'm just putting out the facts here of what people looking at this are considering. And when you think about that, in the NFL, the revenue from attendance is about 15 to 16% of their overall revenue. It's a relatively small number. In college, it's at least double that. Some schools, it's even more than that. I talked to one coach who said, look, we're going to make about $105 million per year off of football attendance. And 80 million of that about 80 million comes from attendance and contributions. So you've got to think that attendance and donor contributions go hand in hand. That's incredibly important for all of these schools. And it's why, guys, to throw another haymaker in here, I actually think it's becoming more and more likely that we could see a spring football season beginning sometime in January, maybe February, and then going through early May. And there's a lot of planning that would have to go into that, but it may be the best case to try and have fans in the stands for the revenue perspective.
Correct. Okay, so now we've hit upon the second part of this, which is if it's not safe enough to do it in the fall, do they try to move it to another time? For all the reasons that Laura just pointed out, there's so much money involved here. They're going to find a way to do it if they can. Paul Finebaum, what do you think of the idea of spring college football?
I think it's even more ridiculous than playing without students or fans. Greeny, how about the Michigan at Northwestern game on January 28th in Evanston? You went to school there. You can't even go outside in Chicago that time of the year. You can't go to a game in Ann Arbor or State College or Madison. And on top of all that, you completely shatter the college basketball season, which I think is unfair to that sport, even though it's a less revenue than football. So of all the ideas that are absurd that I've heard already during this conversation in relation to possibilities, spring football is the worst.
Booger, let's even say for the sake of discussion, they could figure out some of those geographic and logistical issues. Would you then be in a position where the teams, the players who were still there, would play a season in the spring and then another season the following fall? They could be playing 20 games in a calendar year. Is that a possibility?
Well, first of all, Greeny, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard, because in this age of player safety, where we're trying to get the game safer for players, you want 17 to 21-year-olds to play a season in the spring, take about 2 months off, and then come back and play another season. To hell with player safety. Let's just call it what it is. This is all about the money. I hear what Laura's talking about with all the physical implications, but at some point, can we put the money aside and just say this? Are we about safety or we're not? Because if we're not about safety, then let's just stop talking about it. If this is all about money, let's just talk about what it is. We want to make sure from an economic standpoint that we can take care of all the collegiate.
Here's the problem, though. I agree with everything you said. The other side of the argument, and I'm with you, the athletic directors are going to argue if we don't have football, we are getting wiped out. And there's a lot of validity to that argument.
So is it all about the money, or is it about the player's safety? I think that's the thing from a overall humanity standpoint that we have to ask ourselves, because we're trying to play football at all costs, and I get it. We want to be entertained. Football is the fabric of this country, but at some point, can we ask ourselves, we want 17 to 21-year-olds to play basically, I mean, LSU just won a national championship this year. They played 15 games. So we're going to play 15 games in the spring and then another 15 in the fall, 30 games.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.